everything. So again, I'm Jared. I'm an athletic trainer, and this is a profession that handles the whole spectrum of sport-related injuries, the policy side, but also the management, the treatment, the rehabilitation. And as of right now, about 15 international schools have an athletic trainer, and it is kind of growing. I got started at Concordia Shanghai. If any of you know Chris Bishop at The Hague, he was my supervisor. And I'm based out of Brussels, Belgium now, and I work at ISB in St. John's with Anthony Henley and Lee Rosti, if any of you know them. And about a couple years ago, I started this entrepreneurship, Good Practice LLC, and I advocate and assist international schools to help with sports injuries and the policy side, the education side, the awareness side, and also event coverage. So if please use me as a resource anytime in the future if you have any questions for your organization or your athletic conference on this subject or any other sports safety subject. Yeah, and I've worked with a bunch of schools that you may be familiar with in the. So like I said, I'm gonna start with a couple quick stories. Again, I'm an athletic trainer. I work directly with sports teams, and this is one sports team here that I worked with right after grad school. So I was fresh out of grad school. I worked at LIU Brooklyn, a Division I NCAA school, and I was primarily working with baseball. I also worked with volleyball as well. And I'm a fresh graduate, and I knew that there was a lot of sport-specific injuries common with baseball, specifically here to the elbow. You may have heard of Tommy John surgery. That's when this ligament here, the UCL in the elbow, tears and needs to be repaired. And also at the shoulder, there's labrum surgery is very common, and the typical one is called a slap lesion and requiring surgery. I knew about that, but once I started working baseball, I didn't realize the extent and scope and breadth of this essentially epidemic happening in these young, healthy kids. When I first got there, we had 3 pitchers that had come in with previous Tommy John surgery, and about probably 3 or 4 with some sort of shoulder surgery. So out of 30 guys, I'm walking through the door, and there's 5 guys already that have had previous history of that sort of injury. Keep in mind, they're only 18, 19, 20 years old. And during my first season, this happened in my first season. After my first season, we had 2 more pitchers popping their UCL ligament in their elbow, and 3 more labrum surgeries that required. Actually, it may have been a 4th. So in my mind, as an outsider, first time working baseball, I'm like, what the heck is going on? Like, this is, I know obviously in an overhead sport like this, it's going to be dangerous at the shoulder and elbow, but these are, very fit athletic guys, and they're just breaking down, or they're already broken. So that led me to start researching the subject of, as I started researching, this is the American Sports Medicine Institute. This is if you've heard the name Dr. James Andrews, this is his clinic. He's one of the best orthopedic surgeons in the world. And I started finding information like this. And again, a lot of the stuff I'm going to put up today is articles. And I'm just going to read this. With the rise in elbow and shoulder injuries in adolescent baseball pitchers, the adult community needs to take steps to prevent these injuries. Research points to overuse as the principal factor. So as I learned about this, I started talking with the baseball players. Tell me about your history of baseball. And these are all guys that have played year-round baseball since the age of about 12. Fall ball, summer ball, spring ball, clinics, showcases, private coaching. And they, in some cases, some of them experience their first significant injury or even surgery when they're 16 years old. And now I mentioned the Tommy John surgery. This is an article actually in the NFHS recently about the creator of the surgery that repairs the UCL ligament in the elbow, very common in baseball pitchers, about saying the epidemic he's seeing in the operating room. So him going on the advocacy side, saying we need kids to be playing multiple sports, not specializing. And here he specifically cites ACL surgeries. That's a ligament within the knee. So this is mainly going to be people who are specializing in soccer. Of all the cases that they're doing surgery on, 60% of them are between the ages of 6 years old and 18 years old. That's a lot. Almost 60% of the Tommy John surgeries are between 15 and 19 years old. Dr. James Andrews, the owner of the American Sports Medicine Institute, he says of all his surgeries, 40% are pediatrics. So those are pretty significant numbers to me. Another story I have is this. So now that was in the university level. The last 6 years I've worked with the international school, secondary school level. So, ages, our age, 14 to 18. One player specifically, and now this is soccer, high-level soccer player, playing soccer year-round, multiple teams. During our high school sports season, has a hamstring strain. I don't think much of it. We treat it, manage it, get some rest, rehab, return to sport, goes back to playing soccer. A year later, almost at the exact same point in the season, nearly the same tournament a year later, same thing, same hamstring, same spot. And now I'm like, what's going on? We need to have a more in-depth look at what this is, because this isn't a coincidence. One time could be, benign, but second time and nearly the same date, there's something bigger going on here. And as we talked and I learned more about her macro level training and schedule, this was her schedule. From summer all the way through 12 months out of the year, soccer. And at this time, she was about 16 years old, and she had been doing this for at least 4 years, roughly. So summer is loaded with all sorts of camps and clinics. Then in the fall, we play soccer in the spring in the previous league in Shanghai. So fall, she's playing at least one club team, sometimes two, and then doing clinics. And then during the spring season, she's playing club and our high school team. This is no surprise that there's a breakdown point. So after the second time, we took a bigger picture look and tried to game plan what her 12-month plan will look like going forward, so we're not stuck in the same position next year. And when we did that, we were very successful. She had an off season in the summer. She played for her fall club. Before the fall club season, she had a period of strength and conditioning, then playing her fall season, and then she had at least a month break before starting the spring season. I think it may have been more than a month. And we continued to do hamstring maintenance and some other strength and conditioning as the season went on, and she became the leading goal scorer and got a scholarship into university in the U.S. Same thing in basketball. If any of you are basketball fans, we can all give an example of a recent high draft pick that hasn't maybe turned out so well, because as soon as they get to the NBA or right before they get to the NBA, they have some sort of catastrophic injury. They were having a stress fracture, and then it turns into a full-blown acute compound fracture. We've seen some ugly ones recently over the last few years. This is a great article. I encourage you all to read this about sports specialization in basketball. With AA in the U.S., AAU basketball has become year-round, and that's a lot of the current stars, the NBA, that are having or at the university, NCAA as well, they're having some of these injuries have come up through this program. So I'm going to define it. What is single sport specialization or youth sports specialization? So for our purposes today, it's year-round participation in training and competition in one sport at the cost of excluding all other sports. Okay. Generally, that's going to be 8 months out of the year. So that typically takes up, our whole school year, at least. And then usually they're even doing stuff over the summer in this sport. I would encourage you, if you want to read some scientific articles on the subject, this issue of Journal of Athletic Training, just recently published, gives a lot of good details on what we're seeing on the clinical side. Again, most of this is anecdotal and initial in its research, but it's really good stuff. And this is where I draw a lot of my articles today that we're going to be talking about. So why do kids specialize in a single sport? They're obviously drawn to their superstars. They want to be, Michael Jordan. They want to be Tom Brady. So the allure and glamour of becoming professional or elite or going to the Olympics, those sorts of things. A lot of times it's coming from the parents. Maybe they were a former athlete, or they could be projecting that they want the success that they wanted when they were a child for their son or daughter. Societal pressure, we do place a lot of emphasis on sports. A lot of people, whether they're in a financial situation or not, they see going to the elite level of their sport as a way to get a university scholarship. Maybe they don't come from a wealthy background. This is a big issue in the U.S. because college tuition is very expensive. And they see that as their only way to get to, ultimately the pros, or at least getting that scholarship, that they have some sort of future, for themselves, because they can't afford college on their own. But I would say probably in our population, in the international school setting, I would say that's probably less of an issue, I'm guessing. And they also have other options as international scholarships as well. A lot of time they're getting pressure from their sports club and coaches. They butter the kids up saying how talented they are. They have a real legit chance of going pro or getting a college scholarship if they focus on that single sport. However, a lot of times from these coaches and sports clubs, there's an inherent bias. They're kind of looking to make a buck, aren't they? So those that overly praise and really trying to sell them to specialize and participate in focusing on the one sport could be pulling them in that direction. And the cost, at what cost does this sport specialization have? Well, it's kind of ironic that a lot of them see this as a path to their financial freedom by going pro, being rich, getting wealthy, but it's really expensive to even get there. I was just talking about the sports clubs and private coaching. There's a big cost to it. And the more so what I'm going to focus on is going to be the injury and the mental health aspect. A lot of times they're excluding, to focus on the one sport, they're excluding a lot of other activities and also just time with their friends. So it can be really isolating that, they may have friends in the high school at your international school, but they have to spend all their time at a club where they may not be as close with those kids, or they're playing on multiple teams and they don't really have a core group of friends. And they're missing out on other activities and just downtime and just general playtime. They tie their self-esteem and their self-worth with the sport. It becomes their identity. This can add psychological stress, anxiety, mental health issues like overly competitive perfectionism. And then eventually, if they don't have an adequate physical fundamental, then and these are young, still developing kids that they don't even have their growth plates closed yet. Orthopedic injury can happen, and physical development issues can also happen, like I was just saying with the growth plate. if that gets affected because of single sport participation, they could have long-term consequences with that. Oh, I'm sorry. And then eventually what happens is that they play the single sport for so long that they end up just hating it. They burn out, they quit. And as the providers to athletic programs, we want people to have, the kids to have a positive approach to physical activity, fitness, and sports. So this is kind of counterproductive to our mission. In one of the studies, these are all organizations that have come out against sport specialization. So we can see some of these here, orthopedic groups. This is a French Federation of Sport organization, National Athletic Trainers Association. That's my professional organization. The American Academy of Pediatrics, sports medicine organizations. All of them across the board, we see here position on early specialization, the psychosocial effects, benefits, if there are, and then the recommendation for when is a safe time to specialize in the sport. And all these across the board are really, they discourage early sports specialization entirely. All these organizations are kind of in agreement on it. The only outlier is the IOC, the International Olympic Committee. They kind of maintain a neutral position all across the board across these subjects, which is kind of understandable with their position, I guess. They need people to get to their level, I guess. But across the board, these other organizations are finding the same type of trend of the dangers of specializing in sport. So it's not just one organization, that it's pretty much a vast majority of them. So what sorts of injuries are we seeing? We're seeing generally overuse injuries, tendinopathies. So this may manifest in a patellar tendonitis, hamstring tendonitis, bicep tendonitis, that's in the shoulder. Developmental disorders, Osgood-Schlatter's, Sever's disease. You may have heard of these before. And just because a student athlete develops some sort of issue like this, it doesn't mean that the issue is indeed sports specialization. It should be taken into effect, and that may be the circumstances. You need to have a comprehensive look on what may be causing this sort of thing. Lack of preparation for the season, lack of fundamental strength and conditioning, they're new to the sport, whatever it may be. But for those that are specializing and they are developing overuse injuries, that may be a red flag that it's too much. Stress fractures, specifically spondylolisthesis or spondylosis, that's a stress fracture in the low back. Or stress fracture in the lower leg, the tibia, the fibula. And then arthritis. It's crazy to me that a 16-year-old kid is potentially going in for surgery on their knee or their shoulder for arthritis. That's something that should be happening when we're 60, 70, 80-year-old. So generally we see the overuse injuries with specialization, but we do possibly see acute injuries due to fatigue. They're just overtraining, and then that lends itself to a possible sustaining an acute injury. And we see that possibly in an ACL tear in the knee, meniscus, like I was saying, the elbow ligament of the UCL. That can wear down and fray over time, but ultimately what tends to happen is it just pops after a pitch. And then muscle strains, constant muscle strains. This is the article that I mentioned before in the Journal of Athletic Training. This is I would encourage you all to have a look at this at your leisure. It's not very long. It's only maybe 5-6 pages. But this is where I got most of it was pretty eye-opening to me. So it's also ironic that there'll be something populated next to those arrows. It's also ironic to me that the student athlete or the parent feels that they have to specialize in order to be successful. But when in reality, they don't really know the odds of success to get to that ultimate goal of theirs, of whether it be Olympics, elite, professional, whatever it may be. So let's take the example of basketball. In the US, high school basketball player, the odds of them getting to NCAA, any level, it's Division 1, 2, and 3, at any level playing on a varsity team is 3.4 to 3.8%. So that's fairly low. 97% of kids are not going to get to the NCAA. They are playing high school basketball. And then for the Division I and earning a scholarship, it's about 1%. So of all those kids that think they're going to get a college scholarship, 99% chance that they're not going to get it. And then advancing from NCAA to the NBA, 0.9 to 1.2% chance from NCAA to the NBA. And then when you add that up for a kid to go all the way from high school to pro, you can see the number there. It's quite low. 0.008 to 0.011%. So I think before a kid endeavors onto the path towards possibly becoming professional, they should fully understand the odds of that happening, so they can at least be aware of the risks that they're going to take on. So this is in that article. This is I'm just going to read this. This is a study they did. 237 NBA players, 15% were multi-sport, 85% were single sport. So you would pull from that, you would extrapolate that single sport specialization has a higher chance of getting to the NBA. You can see that kind of there in the numbers. However, those NBA players that played multiple sports in high school were less likely to sustain a major musculoskeletal injury than those who focused on basketball alone. And in general, those who played multiple sports had a longer career in the NBA as well. So these are just some athletes that I pulled up: Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Roger Federer, Steve Nash, and even the recent Super Bowl champion Patrick Mahomes. These are all high-level athletes that have had a fairly not too bumpy road. Of course, injuries are going to happen, but they've had a pretty long, healthy, successful career. All of them are multi-sport participants. They didn't specialize until late high school, until ultimately going pro. So those that think that specializing in sports is going to get them to the pros, according to this study, there's no correlation. There's not sufficient evidence that intense training and specialization before puberty is necessary to achieve elite status. And there are risks of injury and psychological stress. So at the athletic director level and the administrative level, how can we address this if we want to deter sports specializing and encourage multi-sport participation? Is educating. I think the kids should have a realistic expectation of what the odds are that they're going to make it to that pro elite level. And they should understand the risks of specializing, the risk of injury or developmental issues. I think ADs and organizations can address this by having a culture of encouraging multi-sport participation. By, that soccer player that loves soccer, okay, yeah, but how many free throws can you make? How can you do on the basketball court? How's your badminton game? I think there are fun ways to encourage that. We could prevent it by highlighting, trying to track down those that may be potential for specializing in sports by just having a proactive discussion on it, addressing these risks and expectations that I was just stating. But if all else fails and that there's going to be a couple kids that are specializing, it'd be a good idea to have your counselor in on a conversation about that. Likely in your programs, you're probably not dealing with too many that are going to specialize, but there are mental health risks to specializing, like I was saying, with fatigue, burnout, overly competitive, obsessive compulsion, possibly even eating disorders associated, anxiety. So I would encourage you to have a chat with your counselors and making sure that there are resources available if the red flags do go up of mental health and social emotional issues going on. And if you do want to put your foot down, if you do feel it's appropriate, develop a policy for yourselves to cover your end that If you're playing on multiple sports during our high school season, then I'm sorry, you're not going to play for us because it's too risk of danger. I don't know how that would go over for each of your programs. I'm just saying that it is an option to put your foot down in that case. So if you are proactive, hopefully that doesn't need to happen, but it could be there as an option for yourselves. So I showed that one schedule of all soccer. Ideally, this is what the kids schedule should look like for activities. Before they start that fall season, they have some sort of preseason preparation, strength and conditioning on their own or as a team somehow. They do their soccer season. They transition to a different sport, basketball. They transition to a different sport, baseball. And then they have some sort of general fitness, general play time allotment. And then they need an off season. They need at least a month of just no sports whatsoever to appropriately recover. So in theory, this is what a good schedule should look like macro level for the whole year. And the NATA, my professional organization, has created guidelines to help you to follow. Delay specializing in a single sport as long as possible, one team at a time per season. Less than 8 months per year. So if they are going to play one sport, less than 8 months out of the year. No more hours per week than age and years. So if they're 16 years old, they should not be participating in more than 16 hours of that organized sport per week. 2 days of rest per week. And rest and recovery time from organized sport participation. So some sort of full off season for at least 4 weeks, if not a month or two. In these guidelines, there are some nice graphics to help you out to identify your approach to discuss this. And here are all the stakeholders kind of involved: the parents, the coaches, the actual organization, that would be your athletics program, and the medical clinicians and all, the medical clinicians involved. And so this graphic kind of highlights some of the things that you should be discussing or that should be addressed with your conversations. In closing, this is a physical therapist for the NBA. The contemporary athlete is like a car with a carefully crafted and powerful engine, but one that lacks suspension and braking, thereby making the engine futile, as it can never be used to full potential. In other words, as skilled as a modern athlete may be, their bodies, particularly their ankles, hips, and core, are broken down to the point where they will never be able to demonstrate their full range of athletic skills. We tend to hear of people like Rafa Nadal and Lionel Messi about those that specialize at the age of 10, 8, 10, 10, 12, and they go on to be successful. And this quote, I think, reflects that. History is always written by the winners. So we know the ones that have made it, but we don't know the ones that haven't. And there have been a lot more people out there that haven't made it than that have. There's not a lot of Lionel Messi's and there's not a lot of Rafa Nadal's out there. And unfortunately, we don't know the stories of those that didn't make it. So in closing, be brave. This is kind of the general advice I give athletic directors, because it involves sometimes taking a look in the mirror at your program and at your handbook. So be brave when reflecting on your program and your athletes and your coaches, and have the general care of those athletes at the core of your program, and then just be prepared. And that is it for me. So with that, I would love to open it up to discussion, facilitated by Matt and whoever wants to chime in with any questions or general discussions or experiences that you may have.
If anybody has a question, what I can do is just raise your hand, and then I'll call on you I'll unmute you if you want to ask Jared a question. Or you can put your question into the chat.
Or that may have caused an issue in your program?
Sorry, Jared, I accidentally muted you. You want to repeat that, please?
I apologize. I'll pose if anyone has pose the question out there. If anybody has an experience with the sport specializing in any of your current or previous athletes that may have caused an issue in your program.
I think one of the things I come across a lot, our program is pushed towards multi-sport. We try not to double up on sports. We try and encourage our awards reflect involvement across the program, not excellence in any one specific thing. And in Dhaka, I haven't had this issue as much, but back when I used to work in Shanghai, the problem of the club system and trying to work, they're very focused in on developing their kid for their specific sport. They usually run all year long. We end up with problems with cross conflicts with their practices, my practices, all that kind of stuff. So that's something in the bigger centers that's hard to manage. You can control your space, but not the space outside your school, which makes it tough.
Agree. That's sometimes, especially when you want to maintain a good working relationship with that sports club. You don't want to step on any toes, but that's when it's good to have proactive communication and conversations about this sort of thing. And good on you. Are you riding a bike right now?
I am. It's my third session on a bike.
Bravo. Well done.
Nick was doing that as well in another meeting I saw.
Yeah.
It's a popular thing. I was walking in place. I'm jealous I don't have a bike.
Mm.
Anybody else with a question for Jared? You can unmute yourself now.
Yeah, if you're talking, you're muted.
Jared, I'm not sure if you covered this. I popped in late. I was in the leadership one and then I popped over here.
Mm-hmm.
Any recommendations for between season time off? How much time off should be taken between seasons in order to let the body heal and get ready for the next season?
Yeah, before the start of any sports season, there should be some sort of preparatory phase that probably doesn't happen in almost every athletic conference. I would assume it's pretty much straight from one to the other. So I would encourage to at least all athletic directors to at least delay games as best you can, and don't load the front end of the seasons as heavily as possible. Generally, you're going to want at least to get any sort of strength and conditioning preventative benefits. You're going to want at least 3 or 4 weeks of training before full-blown competition. There should be an initial just rest period, at least a week or 2 would be nice, and then a physical preparation for that different sport of at least 3 or 4 weeks, if possible. I know you guys.
I'm listening to you and I'm going, okay, not enough weeks in the season.
I get it. I've been on conversations with athletic directors looking at the macro schedule. Can we push these things back so we get a little bit more time here between season 2 and season 3? I know it's difficult. I'm just telling you what kind of is optimal. And if we could meet somewhere between real life and optimal, that's great. So at the end of the season, at least a week or 2 would be nice of rest and a preparatory phase for the next season. But I know more than likely that's difficult.
And I would guess that changes kind of on the level of your program, right? And how intense it is in season.
Correct.
As you move from one to the other. If you're at more of a lower level competition and practice rate, you might not need to.
In your season, if you have more practice exposures and it's longer, then obviously the longer the rest period and the preparatory phase for the next season would be. Or in an ideal world again.
Yeah.
I had a question for you, Jared.
Yes, please.
I have the similar issues that Mike has with with clubs and Mike, I'm not on the bike. I'm making dinner, so I'm basically doing the opposite. I'm just ready to eat.
We balance each other out.
I think so. So the question relates to, you're talking about strength training. And I think we all have this issue with athletes going from one sport, especially your top athletes in the international circuit. They go from one sport to the next sport. And as Mike alluded to, you're kind of tight on time and you just want to get right into it. And of course, that next coach is desperate to have the season before finished so that they can start into their season. Do you have any advice on strength training and how you could incorporate that part to kind of limit these injuries that happen to adolescents in particular?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of great free resources out there. So like, for example, if you're dealing with soccer, if you're talking specifically about the soccer team, FIFA has a great strength and conditioning and injury prevention resources out there. Same with the NBA. There's plenty of great free resources out there. I think that the best way to implement that is by having these proactive conversations and cultural set into your program, that the expectation for all your sport coaches of all seasons is to implement some sort of off the ball strength and conditioning, injury prevention implementation into your program. So the example, I'm just going to stick with FIFA. They have an ankle strengthening preventative program and ACL prevention program, and you can build that in to just, it's a part of your warm up that you're doing these exercises. The first 15 minutes of practice, you do that twice a week. So I think there's little tricks and tweaks that you can do with your practice planning to implement these sort of things. I think the resources just need to be provided or just facilitated with the coaches, with that expectation that it's clear. We would like you to also make sure you build into your planning these sort of prevention things.
So you're thinking just twice a week, 15, I was kind of looking for a numerical.
Oh, number. Okay. Yeah. Start manageable. You can do things that can be of assistance in just two times 15 minutes a week. Start from there. Start with whatever you can. Start manageable. Don't overload your coaches, because the bigger the barrier, the less chances for success there are. You don't need a whole start big in that I need a strength and conditioning program that is just going to get my kids hypertrophied and all that stuff. Start small, start manageable.
Okay.
So FIFA makes a guideline for training and recommendations for program or warm-ups and stretching, or.
I'm sorry, I got you cut off at the beginning. Could you say that again, Matt?
Yeah. So does FIFA make guidelines for warm-ups then?
Yeah. I would definitely refer you to the biggest organization for whatever sport we're talking about here, NBA, FIFA, whatever it may be. Almost all the organizations offer great free resources. Specifically about FIFA, off the top of my head, they have I think it's called something.
The 11 plus.
Thank you, Anthony. The 11 plus program, and the NBA has extensive information, basketball specific.
Okay.
So I would refer you to that and have those conversations with your coaches and facilitate that information.
Just as a bit of background, the 11 plus by FIFA, they put a lot of research and stuff into it, and a lot of national governing bodies around the world are really pushing it. And it's not football or soccer specific. It's a general pulse raising and mobility warm up that you could argue could be used by any sport, really.
Correct. Yeah, a lot in this age group as well. A lot of what you should do specifically on the mobility warm up wise is transferable between sports in this specific age group. So if you could only get your hands on the 11 plus for soccer, and you want to do it for basketball, that's good. And I'm sure, Anthony, there's probably something out there for like rugby as well.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. I'm a bit more of a football head, so I know more about the 11 plus. But I haven't actually looked at any of the rugby ones. But I would imagine that the RFU in the UK would have some really, really good ones for rugby and more contact sports like that.
Yeah. And if you have coaches, like I was saying, that transferability, if you have one soccer coach that has a program that they're comfortable with and they're also coaching basketball, something is going to be better than nothing.
All right.
Any questions? Good.
I'm just going to put the 11 plus website link in the chat.
Thank you.
It's a little bit more comprehensive. If you go through it fully, it's probably something that you can work through in training sessions and have your coaches deliver different elements, and then take the bits that you think are most relevant to do on your match day warm-ups.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Anthony.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone.
The end, and thanks again for another great presentation, Jared.
Yep. Feel free to touch base. I've got plenty of resources on my website, Good Practice LLC, and also the same social media handles. Please feel free to contact me anytime. Happy to help out anytime.
And this will be in the folder for this time slot in Jared's presentation, or on the Globetrotting AD website when the resources are all ready to go here shortly.
Thanks to the Globetrotting ADs.
All right. Thank you. See you at the next session.